So I'll be following on from what Gareth highlighted about the other 4 countries, but India-specific findings for me. So just to give you a broad insight into what the aim of the project was, I know it's already been highlighted by Samir sir and Gareth, but just to really gain an insight into the attitudes that drive policy making in India with regards to water management. So just to give you a theoretical background of what has really driven water debates in India and South Asia at large is a kind of a zero-sum approach to water sharing, which is a proposition wherein one party's gain is viewed as another party's loss. So for example, a water sharing deal between India and Pakistan would generally be driven by this kind of a mindset, which is that, it can either be loss of one or, and the victory of another. So this is actually at the very core of how transboundary water sharing is carried on, or at least debates around transboundary water sharing are constructed. And at least to our mind, this was the larger vision of the project, that in order to understand how water is governed in domestic and transboundary terms, it's very important at first to pin down what water as a resource and what its conceptual underpinnings really are, right? So of course, the larger aim was to foster a joint regional vision across all these countries that can take into account best practices, that can cut across this kind of statist, securitized discourse around water. So multiple stakeholders. So when we talk about, and this was our target group, it's an elite survey. So, we're interviewing 165 interviews conducted primarily of people who are important stakeholders and who have a say in how water policies are eventually formulated. So, the site selection was the states covered by the 3 basins of India, the Ganga Basin, the Brahmaputra Basin, and the Indus Basin, including the states of Uttar Pradesh, Haryana, Punjab, West Bengal, and Delhi. So, interestingly, about the key findings on perceptions around domestic water challenges, 18%, a mere 18% of the total respondents were satisfied with the domestic water scenario. So that should give you an idea of the kind of negative terms in which domestic water management is really shaped. Of the pressing challenges faced by the nation, not water-specific challenges, when we asked respondents to rate the challenges faced by the country, 65% of the respondents deemed meeting the challenges of urban and industrial expansion, followed by economic growth as their priorities or as their policy focus, whereas only 8% of the respondents identified water management as a priority for the country. So, that should give you a broad sort of idea that these are water experts that we are trying to interview, but even within their mind space, water management is, kind of a secondary concern. So, moving on, just to give you a broad kind of overview of what are the commonly challenged, water-specific challenges. They're not, when we conducted these interviews, they weren't really, these are very commonly known challenges. So just to highlight them, declining quality in terms of water pollution, declining quantity caused by monsoon variability, over-extraction of groundwater, high levels of salinity, overconsumption of water in the agricultural sector. This is, of course, a recurring concern again and again, and I'll highlight that later in my presentation. Common belief that agriculture being the dominant water usage is a problem for India. And interestingly enough, India, the competing pressures on India due to its urban boom, as predicted by most of the water experts, was a concern that most people seem to have, that by 2040, 407 million people will be a part of this kind of huge sprawling urbanization process, and current usage patterns of water do not reflect that. So we are an agrarian country, of course, so that's where our focus is. So interestingly, this kind of a framework was viewed in extremely unfavorable and negative and counterproductive terms, in fact. So, it should give you an idea of where most of, how positively this urban trend is being viewed, and how water patterns and water usage patterns it was deemed paramount for such usage patterns to be reflective of that. So, quickly then moving on, the main dominant issue, so these were just general challenges that I was talking about, but the main dominant issue that seemed to just take over the whole discourse on water, domestic water management, was the lack of a water management strategy. Now, anytime we spoke to people about just the general challenges, the one thing that, the key thing that came up over and over again is that water management in India is an ad hoc, is done on an ad hoc basis, or there is a lack of a domestic vision for water. Now, that's quite interesting because it really helps you kind of take an overview of, the kind of issues, real or imagined, that get encapsulated within this larger umbrella problem. So you have people saying there are coalition pressures, there is jurisdictional problems between the center and the state, that water is defined as a state subject in the constitution. So we don't really know what to do about it, or how to adjudicate a conflict between two states. And this, of course, is impacting our larger water management strategy, is what the experts seem to believe. But that there is no balance between demand side management and the augmentation of the supply side. There is a lack of a central grasp on water issues. There is a lack of an interlinked understanding of water. The food, water, energy nexus is crucial, but it's not been administered into policies yet, which basically means that water is seen as a resource which is divorced from its other agricultural or energy usage. So I'm just trying to highlight why this dominant issue highlighted by most of the respondents was so important to the study, which is that it kind of reflects the root of the problem. That is, there is a lack of paradigmatic clarity on what water really is. Is it an economic good? Is it an infinite sacred resource? Is it a state subject? Is it a central subject? Is it a resource that's subject to being governed across the basin? So who does this, if it is a common pool, then who does this pool really belong to? So, that's why I think that, this entire umbrella of water management issues is, as I'm going to later highlight in my presentation, also has very significant implications for the transboundary water issues that plague India, So, I'll be developing this linkage in a bit. But just to get back to the domestic ideas, there were, when asked to rate the states with the best water access and urban service delivery, most people rated Tamil Nadu with a 39%, Rajasthan with a 31%, and Karnataka as a 20% with the best water management strategies. And interestingly, the reasons for this would tell you that their ability to use off-the-grid water conservation methods. So respondents actually thought that Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Rajasthan were successful models because they were able to use off-the-grid conservation methods or storage methods, or actually supplement the gaps that the urban mainstream water models could not deliver. So, that should, it's a great insight into how community participation was rated extremely high by respondents, and that is something that should be taken into account. But at the same time, there was also less optimism about how these smaller success stories, or how these how these community participative models can be brought into the mainstream. So my colleague Shonali and Gareth at the beginning of the project undertook a lot of case studies where they, for example, they studied the Aravari River case in Rajasthan, which used indigenous water storage structures called johards, or small-scale benefit-sharing models involving rainwater harvesting in the Sukna Lake. So, these were also repeatedly, these are trends that came up, or these were cases that were cited by the interviewees. But the reason, so while there was an accompanying sense of, pessimism about how scalable these measures really are, I'm highlighting these stories and cases exactly in line with the aim of the project, which is that, it is only when these different water communities and these different, even small-scale ideas of water management come into interaction with the bigger mainstream urban ideas, or the mainstream policymakers, can there be like a wholesome water conversation, which can then impact water management. So this is really the point of this entire research exercise. And then there was, of course, strong consensus on water pricing and privatization. 70.9% of the total respondents agreed that privatization would be a positive step of water service delivery. And 63% of the total respondents agreed that differential pricing, according to usage and income, should be administered to foster judicious usage of water. Now, this is also an ethic that is highlighted in the National Water Policy, Draft Policy of 2008. And it's interesting that this is one area where government respondents and private sector respondents were quite in agreement. So you can see, the kind of maybe foreseeable trends that this indicates. There were, of course, a lot of sectoral differences in, in the responses to key questions. What do we mean by sectoral responses? Because our target group was media people, academics, government respondents, and private respondents. It would be private sector respondents. It would be, if we could get a lot of insight into what are the schisms in, the water conceptual paradigm in India. So the transition from agrarian to industrial, the transition was seen as vital to solving the problem of water conservation as per government officials and private sector employees. Why? Because consumption share of agriculture, as I highlighted before, is seen as a major problem. Changing patterns of urbanization need to be reflected and accommodated with changing patterns of water efficiency. The subsidy politics, which encourages misuse of water, as a lot of respondents highlighted from the government sector in rural areas, needs to be overlooked, needs to be rethinked. Respondents from the NGOs and academia, however, countered that promotion of such a shift and incentivizing water-efficient cropping methods alone is not the solution. Methods of viewing water needs to change. We need to see it, like I mentioned earlier, as embedded in the larger food, water, energy nexus. And these kind of measures alone would not contribute to any kind of positive results. Issues with data, of course, another interesting, divergence in the view was that government employees, of course, emphasized the importance of technical improvements, such as supply data, basin data, better quality information on transboundary bodies like aquifers, groundwaters, and rivers, while academics and NGO respondents said that real data that makes use of a discourse that's accessible to many. So a new language to actually bridge what they seem to think was a technocratic gap, which keeps, an ordinary or a common understanding of water at bay amongst people. So this technocratic gap that needs to be bridged was a huge issue with academics and NGOs. A large section of the respondents, again from the government sector and the private sector, thought big dams, big constructions, and supply-side augmentation is how the water-stressed nature of India can be countered. But of course, NGO workers and academics throughout highlighted how the history of dams in India was a history of displacement. So they obviously then chose off-grid methods, pre-colonial models of development, such as ahars, pines, bunds, etc. So, of course, the scalability of that was raised, and this was an issue that was raised again and again. But again, pricing, there was a wide consensus on differential pricing, but again, it was thought that by the NGOs and academics and even media people that this debate on pricing actually reveals the schism in the conceptual narrative of water. It reveals that, therefore, it is necessary to engage different water communities to streamline a common domestic vision. So you can't have, these competing views on water, which is it an economic resource, is it a common pool resource, is it a sacred, infinite resource? So I feel that these are the two themes so far that have been raised also in the report, as you will find that this idea of domestic water management and a bottoms-up or a community participatory approach, which is also then linked to the larger conceptual framework of water. I know I keep using this term again and again, but that really justifies the point of the study. Again, religion, water, really interesting and really relevant subject now because of the new drive of the government to promote and link these two issues. Again, this was kind of voted and was kind of talked about as a good issue to promote water conservation and to tackle pollution. But then again, there was also a sense of caution amongst government respondents to be really careful in the way they leverage the sacred value of water, because then it's also an issue. While it can be used to reach the most rural pockets of India to foster a water ethic and a water conservation ethic, but at the same time it's also an issue that, you know, if you're not cautious enough, then it can raise a lot of conflicts and issues within the country itself. So again, you know, as I mentioned before, this link between domestic mismanagement and transboundary issues, a couple of key findings that are reflected in our transboundary conversations about India and its water dealings were, interestingly, a lot of the respondents, and we're talking about water experts who worked on negotiations of treaties. Of course, there were a lot of people who knew what they were talking about, but there were also a lot of knowledge gaps in terms of how when you ask them about treaty water sharing mechanisms with Nepal and Bangladesh, they did not know enough about these terms. They did not know, you know, the successful kind of models that have worked in terms of water sharing with these countries in the past. So this actually kind of reflects a preoccupation with domestic issues, that we are so overwhelmed with the volume and the width of our domestic issues that we can't really encourage innovative thinking. Of course, there were innovative solutions, as Gareth had already highlighted, that, you know, there should be a focus on benefit sharing models, there should be data sharing, there should be, like you mentioned, the example of fisheries, but most of these solutions came from people who are working, you know, either in NGOs or people who are not really that connected with governmental formulation of the policies. So I think that that's quite a telling conclusion that can be drawn from all of this research, that, you know, the debate needs to be the domestic vision. As long as that's not factored in, then we can't really have a positive impact on how we conduct our transboundary relationships, right? So some of the key things that we need to reframe the debate based on shared challenges of urbanization, population growth, and water stress scenarios in all the 5 countries. What do I mean by that? I'll just explain that. That the debate needs to be positively framed to have a deeper desecuritized impact. So a lot of the key areas that you know, that we gained from interviewing NGO people and academics was that there should be a data sharing early warning system for floods and droughts, because this was flagged as an area, floods and droughts, which is an issue that impacts both countries. It's an emotive issue, you know, it wreaks havoc. So it's an area where both countries, you know, India and its riparians, can collaborate with minimum friction. Hydropower projects, of course, here we have to be careful, as Gareth highlighted, that, you know, the threat perceptions associated with building hydropower projects should be dismantled, should be minimized. So how does that happen? That happens once you, you know, once you come together on issues that are not so heavily securitized. Joint storage capacity, groundwater and aquifer mapping. So just to give you a sense of how perceptions of India's water cooperation by other countries were viewed, 94% of Bangladeshi respondents, this is courtesy Gareth's report, viewed India negatively. 89% of Nepal viewed India negatively. 18% of Pakistan viewed India negatively. And 39% of Pakistan viewed India and its transboundary water cooperation in positive terms. Now, just to juxtapose that with how India sees its own levels of cooperation with neighboring countries, 50.7% of the respondents thought it was good with Bangladesh, 78% thought it was negative with Nepal, and 34% thought it was negative with Pakistan. So now an really interesting finding, of course, apart from the fact that there is a discrepancy in the way other countries and our neighbors view us in, you know, wholly negative terms, and you know, a slightly more improved perception that we have of ourselves. but even within that, there were a lot of respondents who agreed that the Mahakali Treaty and the Ganges Treaty with Bangladesh and Nepal were unfair because we had set unfair terms. So there is clearly a lot of potential for, reframing treaties in the future, and there's a lot of potential for reframing this in a positive light, because of course there is political will at least to see that, to concede where, we have made mistakes in the past. So again, like I said, shared opportunities that can help reframe the water debate is, to give you a sense, the water usage pattern in Afghanistan, Bangladesh, India, and Nepal. So these are trends that are similar across all these 5 countries. Agriculture is the dominant mainstay, at least in Pakistan and Bangladesh. You can see that, these are similar trends that are reflected across all these countries. So reframing the transboundary debate, then when we keep saying that, what do we really mean? Moving from a zero-sum proposition to a mutual benefit sharing model can only happen when you reduce, the status control over policy processes. And negotiations in transboundary water issues includes multiple stakeholder interests. Recognizing the link between domestic and transboundary management, of course, then becomes key, like we've highlighted. So I think that's a really interesting kind of thing that can underline and really change the way we think about transboundary water cooperation.